Hello, welcome to Know Bible for Self. Today we are discussing the fall of Jericho, Joshua 6. Imagine standing before a massive, impenetrable fortress. Its walls tower high above you, thick, strong, and seemingly impossible to breach. This was the reality for the nation of Israel as they stood on the threshold of the Promised Land, facing the city of Jericho. Jericho was not just a city, it was the formidable gateway, the first obstacle to claiming their inheritance. Militarily, taking it was impossible. The Israelites were a nation of former slaves and desert wanderers, not siege experts. Yet, the story of Joshua chapter 6 is not a tale of military genius, but of radical obedience leading to one of the most spectacular miracles in the Old Testament. This is the story of how the very walls of Jericho crumbled not under the force of human power, but under the power of faith and the sound of trumpets. The events of Joshua 6 follow immediately after two crucial preparations. First, the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River, a display of God's power over nature, confirming Joshua as Moses' successor. Second, the crucial encounter where the commander of the Lord's army appeared to Joshua, confirming that the battle belonged to God alone. This set the stage for the most bizarre, yet effective, battle plan ever conceived. The city of Jericho itself was a formidable opponent. Archaeological evidence suggests it had a massive double wall system, a lower retaining wall perhaps 15 feet high, and a main wall that rose an additional 20 feet or more above it, creating a complex, defensive structure. Inside, the citizens were terrified and locked down, for the Bible tells us Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Joshua 6-1. The divine battle plan, 7 days of silence. God's instructions to Joshua were precise, detailed, and utterly non-conventional. He gave a plan that removed all human strategy, ensuring that when the walls fell, there could be no doubt that the victory was his alone. The plan was divided into two parts, the daily routine and the final climactic action. The daily routine, 6 days, for 6 consecutive days, the entire army of Israel was to perform a silent, ritualistic march around the city once per day. The procession was to be led by the armed men, the soldiers of Israel, leading the way. 7 priests, carrying 7 ram's horn trumpets, or shofars. The priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant, this was the most sacred item, representing the very presence and throne of God. The rear guard, the rest of the army, following behind. Crucially, Joshua gave this command: "You shall not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor shall any word proceed out of your mouth, until the day I say to you, shout. Then you shall shout." The sound heard for 6 days was only the ritualistic blast of the 7 shofars. Pro tip: decoding the silence. The silence was the real test. The Israelites were marching for 6 days with no visible progress, no attack, and no military action. They were exposed to the mockery of the people inside the walls. The order for absolute silence was a command to trust and wait on God's timing, resisting the natural urge to complain, strategize, or take matters into their own hands. The silence stripped them of their own effort and placed the entire burden of success on the miraculous power of the ark they were carrying. Moral lesson from the 6 days: the primary lesson is obedience over logic. God's strategy will often make no sense to the human mind. The 6 days taught the Israelites and teach us that the greatest breakthroughs often come not from frantic effort, but from steadfast, quiet, and repeated obedience to an illogical divine command. The power is in the process of obedience, not the military action. The climax, the 7th day. The 7th day was the pivot point. The routine changed dramatically, demanding a burst of intense action. 7 circuits on this day. The army and priests were to march around the city not once, but 7 times. This number 7 is the number of completion, perfection, and covenant in the Bible. This ritualistic repetition confirmed that the divine plan was reaching its appointed conclusion. The priests' command after the 7th circuit, as the priests blew the final, sustained blast on the shofars, Joshua gave the climactic command to shout. "For the Lord has given you the city." The miracle: the Israelites let out a massive, concerted shout. The sound itself was not the cause, but the sign of their unified faith and obedience. At that moment, the seemingly impossible happened. The wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. The phrase fell down flat tatayo in Hebrew suggests the walls collapsed directly into their foundations, creating a ramp for the soldiers to walk straight up and into the city, confirming the miraculous nature of the collapse. Insider secret: the role of the Ark. The Ark of the Covenant, representing God's presence, was the true weapon. It wasn't the sound waves of the shofars that toppled the walls, it was the invisible, irresistible force of the Almighty acting on behalf of His obedient people. This battle was God for Israel, not Israel for God. The whole event was a visible declaration of divine ownership over the land. The aftermath and Rahab's redemption. The story has two crucial concluding points related to geography and grace. The curse of Jericho. Joshua placed a solemn dramatic curse upon the site of Jericho, forbidding anyone from rebuilding the city, with the terrible pronouncement that whoever did so would lay its foundation at the cost of his firstborn and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son. This curse was a statement that Jericho was a first-fruits offering, dedicated entirely to the Lord, and not to be profited from by man. It underscored the severity of disobeying the initial dedication. Rahab's deliverance. Before the main events, Joshua sent two spies into Jericho, and they were hidden by a woman named Rahab. She confessed her faith in the Israelites' God, stating, "For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." Joshua 2:11. Because of her faith and her action, Joshua commanded that she and her family be spared. They were brought out from the city before it was destroyed and were allowed to dwell among Israel. Moral lesson from Rahab. The story of Rahab teaches us the lesson of redeeming grace and judgment. Even in the midst of overwhelming judgment and destruction, God always makes a way for those who place their faith in Him. Rahab, a Gentile and a woman of ill repute, became an ancestor of King David and, ultimately, of Jesus Christ, proving that faith, not lineage or social status, is the true requirement for belonging to God's people. Conclusion: walls in your life. The story of Jericho remains a profound symbol for believers today. What is the Jericho wall in your life? Is it a habit, a financial problem, a family conflict, or an intimidating goal? The walls of Jericho teach us how to approach these seemingly impossible barriers. Consult the commander, just as Joshua met the commander of the Lord's army. We must seek God's specific instructions for our specific battle. Embrace the absurdity. Be willing to follow God's commands even when they seem illogical, repetitive, or embarrassing. Walk in silence and faith. Remove human noise, complaining, and self-reliance. Let the battle be fought in the quiet confidence that God's presence, the Ark, is your true strength. Shout when commanded. The final shout was not a sound of effort, but a sound of triumphant faith already achieved. It was a declaration that they believed the promise before they saw the result. Our spiritual walls will fall, not by our shouting, but by the mighty power of God when we align our actions with His commands. Thank you for joining us for this inspiring deep dive into the Fall of Jericho. If this message has encouraged your faith today, please hit the like button and subscribe to Know Bible for Self so you don't miss our next story of faith and power. Which seemingly impossible wall in your life are you trusting God to tear down today? Share your faith declaration in the comments below.